So, I want you to picture a scenario for a second. We all know a kid, or, maybe even have a kid, who only eats, say, buttered pasta.
Oh, yeah. A very familiar battleground for a lot of people.
Right. Or maybe it's chicken nuggets. And, like, not just any chicken nuggets, it has to be a specific brand cooked to a very specific, totally non-negotiable level of crispiness.
Exactly. The classic high-tension dinner table standoff. Millions of families are navigating that exact thing every single night.
The dinner table standoff, yes. And usually we just chalk it up to a phase, right? We call them picky eaters. We tell ourselves, well, they'll grow out of it eventually. Their palates will mature.
Yeah, that's the standard assumption.
But what happens when that refusal to eat anything other than those, like, three specific foods stops being a quirky phase? Like when it starts taking a very real, very physical toll.
That is where the conversation completely shifts.
Exactly. So today we are unpacking clinical research on a highly misunderstood condition called ARFID. That's Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. And we're also going to explore how a radical new school-based therapy model in Georgia is stepping in because they're trying to catch kids facing these exact kinds of complex challenges before they, fall through the cracks.
It's such a critical pairing of topics, honestly. Because
Yep.
understanding the biological and psychological mechanics of a condition like AR or AD,
Mm.
well, that's really only the first step.
Right. Knowing what it is doesn't automatically fix it.
Exactly. The real challenge is figuring out how to actually deliver the necessary support to these kids in the real world, specifically in the environments where they spend the majority of their waking hours, which is school.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Let's start with that initial distinction, though, because I think a lot of people listening are probably wondering if, their incredibly stubborn toddler actually has a medical disorder.
Sure.
Like, where's the actual line between just a picky eater and a child with ARFAD?
The clinical distinction really comes down to a single overriding concept, and that's impact.
Impact? Okay.
Yeah. Picky eating is, at its core, a behavioral preference. ARFID is a physiological and psychological barrier. It fundamentally disrupts a child's biology and just their daily existence.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. It's the difference between avoiding a puddle because you don't want to get your shoes wet
Right?
and refusing to leave the house entirely because you are absolutely terrified of water.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. That's exactly it.
One is a preference and the other is a debilitating barrier.
Yes. Picky eating might be really annoying for parents who are, exhausted from cooking 3 different meals every night.
Oh, for sure.
But ARFID creates severe, measurable interference. Like, biologically, you're looking at observable weight loss, or in younger children, a really significant failure to meet growth milestones.
Wow, so it physically stunts them.
It does. You see severe nutritional deficiencies. It frequently gets to the point where the child requires heavy supplementation, or even in extreme cases, feeding tubes.
Wait, feeding tubes just from not eating certain foods?
Yeah. Just to keep their organs functioning, because their diet is so severely restricted that their body is literally shutting down.
God, the physical toll is just immense. But what about the social toll? I'm thinking about how much of childhood revolves around food.
Oh, it is completely isolating. Think about trying to navigate, say, a friend's birthday party or a school field trip.
Right. Pizza parties, Thanksgiving dinner.
Exactly. Imagine trying to do that when your brain perceives the food being served not as sustenance, but as an intolerable threat.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The anxiety of just sitting at a cafeteria table surrounded by smells and textures you cannot handle it becomes completely overwhelming. It interferes with school attendance, it prevents sleepovers, and it totally upends family dynamics.
Which honestly brings up a really crucial assumption we need to tackle here, because when we hear phrases like eating disorder or extreme food restriction, our brains immediately jump to body image.
Yes, they do.
We think of anorexia or bulimia. We just assume this is rooted in a desire to lose weight or conform to a certain physical ideal. So, is that what is driving the restriction in ARFID?
The clinical consensus on this is an emphatic, hard no.
Really?
This is perhaps the most important takeaway for anyone trying to understand this condition. Unlike anorexia, ARFID has absolutely nothing to do with body image.
Wait, nothing at all.
Nothing at all. The restriction is not driven by a distorted view of their own body size or like a fear of gaining weight. The internal mechanisms driving ARFID are completely different.
Okay, so then what is driving it?
Well, the research breaks this down into three primary drivers, and understanding them completely shifts how you view the child's behavior.
I really want to dig into these. Because if it's not about body image, what exactly is happening in their brains when they refuse a plate of food?
So the first major driver is severe sensory overwhelm. And this isn't just, disliking the taste of something.
Right, not just, I hate tomatoes.
Right. We are talking about the nervous system having an extreme, overwhelming reaction to the textures, the smells, the appearance, or even the sound of someone else chewing certain foods.
So it's not a petulant, I don't like broccoli. It's more like the smell and texture of this broccoli is triggering a literal alarm bell in my brain.
Precisely. Their sensory processing centers misinterpret the sensory input of the food as a literal threat. The amygdala fires up, the fight or flight response kicks in, and the food becomes physically intolerable to them.
Wow. Okay, what's the second driver?
The second driver is trauma, specifically a frightening, adverse past experience that's related to the physical act of eating. The most common examples we see are a severe choking incident or a really violent bout of vomiting.
Okay, wait, let me challenge that for a second.
Sure.
If a kid chokes on a piece of steak, right, and then is scared to eat steak again, isn't that just a standard phobia, like, being bitten by a dog and becoming afraid of dogs? Why does a choking incident require a distinct clinical diagnosis, like ARFID?
That is a very fair question. The difference comes down to generalization and biological imperative.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, if you develop a phobia of dogs, you can generally go about your day avoiding dogs without starving to death.
Hold on.
But when a child experiences the trauma of a blocked airway while eating, the brain forms a really powerful maladaptive association. The primal survival imperative to, not choke to death actually overrides the biological imperative to eat.
Oh, wow. So the brain just says eating equals dying.
Exactly. And instead of just fearing the steak, the fear generalizes to all solid foods, or maybe all foods of a certain temperature. Their throat muscles will involuntarily tighten at the mere prospect of eating. It is a physiological lockdown, not just a localized fear.
That completely reframes the behavior, because you cannot discipline a child out of a physiological lockdown.
No, you absolutely cannot.
What is the third driver, then?
The third driver is just a fundamental lack of interest in eating, or an unusually low appetite.
They just forget to eat.
Sort of. The internal biological cues that tell a typical person they are hungry, or the pleasure centers that make eating enjoyable, they're either muted or completely missing. They simply do not feel the drive to consume food.
What's fascinating here is how understanding these mechanisms forces you to change your entire parenting or teaching strategy.
Oh, completely.
Because if you think a child is just being defiant, your instinct is to force them, to say, you aren't leaving this table until you eat your peas.
Right, which is the worst thing you can do.
Or if you think they are worried about their weight, you try to address body image. But if you realize this is a neurological sensory misfire or a trauma-based physical response where their throat is literally closing up, your entire approach has to pivot from frustration to empathy.
Empathy and highly specialized intervention, because once you understand the why, you realize that standard parenting tactics will not only fail, they can actually traumatize the child further. It entrenches the disorder.
So how do we spot it, especially if a kid is just quietly avoiding food at school lunches where parents aren't even watching?
Well, there are specific overlapping conditions and behavioral markers to watch for. Clinically, ARFID frequently co-occurs with autism spectrum disorder and generalized anxiety.
Oh, really? Because of the sensory aspect?
Yes, exactly. The sensory processing differences inherent in autism often set the stage for the sensory-driven type of ARFID.
So if a child already has an autism or anxiety diagnosis, parents and educators should probably be particularly vigilant about their eating habits.
Exactly. And the most glaring behavioral sign is a continuously shrinking list of safe foods.
Shrinking, so it gets worse over time.
Yes. It is not a static list of 10 things they like. It is a list that progressively narrows. A food they ate happily on Tuesday might suddenly become intolerable by Friday, and it never goes back on the approved list.
That sounds terrifying for a parent, just watching the options dwindle down to almost zero.
It is terrifying.
Yeah.
And you will also see intense, visible distress at the prospect of trying anything new. This isn't a polite refusal, It's a panic response.
Right.
Which naturally creates severe anticipatory anxiety around mealtimes.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the families? If a child is physically terrified of textures, or their nervous system has locked down due to choking trauma, What is the path forward? Are they just stuck on nutritional supplements for the rest of their lives?
Actually, the clinical prognosis is very encouraging. ARFID is highly treatable.
Oh, that's great news.
Yeah, but it requires specific targeted intervention. You can't just talk them into eating. The primary gold standard treatment is feeding-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? Are they just sitting on a couch talking about their fear of broccoli?
Not at all. It is highly active and highly structured. Feeding-focused CBT relies heavily on systematic desensitization and exposure therapy.
So exposing them to the fear.
Right. You are actively trying to rewire the neural pathways so the brain learns that the texture or the act of swallowing is not a threat.
But how do you do that without triggering the panic response we just talked about?
In incredibly small, manageable increments. A session might start with just having the target food in the same room.
You sit in the room.
Wow. Yeah. Then the next session, they might just touch it with their finger, then smell it, then touch it to their lips without opening their mouth. It can take weeks to get to the point of actually chewing and swallowing.
That's wild. You are slowly dialing down the amygdala's alarm system.
Exactly. It's literally training the brain to stand down.
But doing that sounds incredibly delicate, like one wrong move and you set them back.
It is, which is why this requires a licensed clinician. This is not something a well-meaning parent can just try to hack together at the dinner table.
Right. Definitely don't try this at home without a professional.
Exactly. It requires coordinated care, often involving the therapist, a pediatrician to monitor the physical vitals, and extensive family support to ensure the environment at home is conducive to the therapy.
Okay, so if the treatment for this requires intense, specialized CBT with a licensed clinician, how does a kid actually get that care? I mean, most kids are sitting in a classroom from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m.
That is the big question.
Because getting a student pulled out of class, driving them across town to a specialized clinic, doing a highly sensitive exposure therapy session, and then driving them back to school, that's a massive logistical nightmare.
It is a massive barrier. The traditional healthcare model is completely disjointed from the reality of a student's daily life.
And that's exactly the problem that a program in Georgia called MentalSpace School is trying to solve, right? By essentially flipping the model upside down.
Exactly. Instead of forcing the kid to go find the clinic, they are bringing the clinic directly into the cafeteria, so to speak.
Right. It is a phenomenal shift in how we approach pediatric mental health. So tell us a bit about what MentalSpace School is doing across Georgia.
Well, MentalSpace School is a comprehensive K-12 mental health support system. And it's vital to understand why this model is so innovative compared to traditional school counselors.
Right, because schools have always had counselors. Why is this any different?
A traditional school counselor is often handling academic scheduling, college prep, and minor behavioral issues for hundreds of students simultaneously. They are stretched incredibly thin.
And they probably aren't trained for this level of clinical work.
Exactly. They are not typically licensed clinical therapists equipped to conduct feeding-focused CBT or severe trauma intervention. MentalSpace provides dedicated teams of licensed clinical therapists specifically assigned to individual schools.
So they basically become part of the school's ecosystem.
Yes.
But what really caught my eye in the research is the speed of access. They offer same-day teletherapy.
That immediacy is revolutionary. I mean, if you look at the systemic failures of the broader mental health system right now, wait lists for pediatric specialists can be 6 to 8 months long.
6 to 8 months, that's half a school year.
Exactly. If a student is having a full-blown panic attack in the cafeteria because of an ARFID trigger or experiencing any other acute crisis, telling them they have an appointment in November is completely useless.
It's worse than useless, it's negligent.
MentalSpace allows a student in crisis to connect with a licensed therapist via telehealth that exact same day.
That is the difference between de-escalating a crisis and letting a child spiral. And it's not just individual therapy, right? They handle broader systemic issues within the school, too.
Absolutely. The program is incredibly robust. They handle acute crisis intervention, suicide and violence prevention protocols, and crucially, they extend their support to the adults in the building as well.
Oh, that's interesting. So, like, the teachers?
Yes, they provide staff wellness programs and family counseling.
Which makes perfect sense. I mean, if a teacher is on the front lines dealing with a student having a severe trauma response or managing the fallout of a behavioral crisis, that teacher is experiencing secondary trauma.
Right. They need support to avoid burning out.
The entire ecosystem needs support.
Now, another critical piece of their model is the demographic makeup of these therapy teams. The research explicitly highlights that their clinicians are diverse, and culturally competent.
And let's be clear, cultural competency in therapy isn't just a corporate buzzword. Why does that matter so much in a clinical setting like this?
It matters because therapy simply doesn't work if there is no trust.
Right.
When a family is dealing with a high-stress situation, whether it's navigating a complex eating disorder like ARFID or systemic anxiety, the last thing they need is a therapist who doesn't understand their cultural background.
Or their community norms.
Exactly. Or their family dynamics.
Yeah.
If a therapist doesn't understand the cultural significance of certain foods to a specific family, they cannot effectively treat an eating disorder in that child.
That makes so much sense.
Culturally competent care removes the friction of misunderstanding. It allows the actual clinical work to happen faster and way more effectively.
So we have this incredible sounding program, same-day teletherapy, dedicated clinical teams, cultural competency, crisis intervention. But let's look at the logistics here, because I know exactly what everyone listening is thinking right now.
How on earth is this being funded?
Exactly. Comprehensive licensed therapy is historically wildly expensive. Who is paying for a dedicated clinical team for every school?
What is brilliant about their funding model is how they bypass the usual bureaucratic red tape that keeps lower-income families out of therapy. They have integrated directly with Medicaid,
Okay.
meaning that for students on Medicaid, the cost of this comprehensive care is exactly $0 out of pocket.
$0. Wow, they have essentially removed the financial gatekeeping of private therapy for the kids who are statistically the most vulnerable.
Exactly. And for students with private insurance, they haven't just partnered with one or two boutique providers. They have built a network that accepts almost every major private insurer operating in the state. From Blue Cross and Cigna to Aetna, UHC, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and AmeriGroup.
That is a massive list.
It is. They have cast the widest possible net to ensure that the financial burden doesn't prevent a child from logging on to that same-day telehealth call.
Okay, so that handles the financial side. What about the legal and bureaucratic side? Because when you mix medical records with educational records, you are walking into a minefield of privacy laws.
Privacy is paramount,
Yeah.
obviously. The infrastructure MentalSpace has built is fully compliant with both HIPAA, which protects medical privacy,
Right.
and FERPA, which protects student educational records.
Okay, so it's secure. But why are schools in Georgia so eager to adopt this right now? I saw a specific piece of legislation mentioned in our research.
Ah, yes. You are referring to HB 268. For those outside of Georgia, HB 268 is a recent legislative mandate that requires all schools in the state to have actionable, comprehensive mental health and safety plans in place.
And there's a ticking clock on this, right?
Yes, there is. The strict compliance deadline is looming in July 2026. If a school doesn't have a robust crisis intervention and mental health support framework operational by that date, they are out of compliance with state law.
Wow, the administrative burden that must place on principals and superintendents is staggering.
It really is.
So MentalSpace isn't just a nice-to-have mental health program. It is a turnkey solution.
Exactly.
The school partners with MentalSpace, and they instantly check this massive, complex regulatory box while simultaneously providing elite care to their students.
Exactly. It solves a clinical crisis for the students and a legislative crisis for the administration. And it's worth noting, for anyone in the Georgia education system listening right now, they are actively onboarding schools for this.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah, you can bypass the usual administrative hunt by going directly to mentalspaceschool.com or reaching out to their team at mentalspaceschool@checktherapy.com to get that infrastructure in place before the deadline.
That's amazing. You know, it is genuinely fascinating to see how the micro and the macro connect here. We started this deep dive looking at the micro, like the internal neural pathways of a child who is terrified of the texture of food.
Right.
We learned that extreme picky eating might actually be a physiological condition called ARFID, driven by trauma or sensory overwhelm rather than just defiance or body image.
And then we zoomed out to the macro. We looked at the societal infrastructure required to actually treat those neural pathways. We saw how traditional systems fail due to wait lists and logistical barriers, and how innovative models like MentalSpace School are bridging the gap by bringing immediate, culturally competent care directly into the school building.
It really paints a picture of a mental health system that is finally trying to adapt to the complex modern realities of what kids are actually dealing with today.
It does. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone with a final thought to mull over, just drawing purely on the mechanisms we've unpacked today.
Absolutely, go for it.
Think about the sheer power of neuroplasticity we discussed with ARFI. If an isolated, frightening physical experience, Something as brief as choking on a piece of food for a few seconds can fundamentally rewire a child's psychological relationship with eating to the point of requiring intensive clinical intervention.
Right.
Then consider the inverse. Consider the profound transformative power of the opposite intervention. If trauma can rewire a brain that quickly, how fundamentally could it alter a child's entire life trajectory to have same-day, culturally competent mental health support instantly accessible the very moment they experience a crisis?
Wow, that is a powerful thought to end on. Keep questioning the why behind the behaviors you see every day, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.